music fades, all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You searched much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. Though I'm weak and I'm poor, all I have is yours, every single breath. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus.
Our scripture this morning comes from John 6, 1 through 6, which reads, After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, Where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat? He said this to test him, for he already knew what he was going to do. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tristan Kretchmar, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to once again bring you all the message this morning. So last summer, for my senior trip, whenever I was asked where I wanted to go, I knew without a doubt I wanted to go to Cedar Point. If you have no idea what Cedar Point is, it's most commonly known as the roller coaster capital of the world. See, I love roller coasters. Roller coasters are one of my favorite attractions whenever we go to theme parks. And I've had my fair share of roller coaster rides over the years. And going to Cedar Point was nothing but a gift. See, Cedar Point has many record-breaking coasters. It has some of the tallest and some of the fastest coasters in the world. One of the coasters that I most looked forward to riding while I was there was one that I had heard about over the years. It was known as Top Thrill Dragster. I had heard about this coaster several times, and I was ready to ride it once I got there. But tragedy struck as the roller coaster was actually shut down for the season. See, this coaster was one that reached speeds of 120 miles an hour and reached a top height of 420 feet. So it was quite the sight to see when you got to the park. It was in the picture-perfect spot as well, in the park's midway. I couldn't wait to ride it. But, again, it was closed for the season. I was disappointed because I had waited all that time to go and ride that coaster. Overall, though, that trip wasn't a waste because, again, Cedar Point has some of the greatest coasters out there. It was honestly one of the greatest trips I'd ever been on. But I couldn't help but still wishing that I could have ridden Top Thrill Dragster. See, as I drove away, I made it my goal to one day return and ride Dragster, but soon after the news broke that Top Thrill Dragster would actually be retiring. I had no idea what retiring meant, but it was retiring. So I found myself eventually looking up what happened, why the coaster was shut down. And it turns out that on that 420-foot top hat last year, or the year prior, I suppose, an object had actually fallen off and hit a lady in the head, so it caused the entire ride to shut down. Unfortunately, though, this ride would be no more, and I knew that. But that was okay. But eventually, after all that research on what had happened to the ride, I actually found out, and I started watching videos on how the ride itself actually operated. And it was actually very fascinating. The amount of safety features and just things in general that made the ride run was numerous, countless. It was actually quite neat. One of the most interesting things was occasionally the coaster, whenever on its initial launch, wouldn't actually gain enough speed to get over the 420-foot top hat. So what would happen was, if that didn't happen, then the car itself would actually start rushing back towards the station, which sounds like a problem until you realize that that problem was actually accounted for. That problem was accounted for in this little rod that has a little groove in it. It's known as the catch car. So once the coaster itself made its ascent up the 420-foot top hat, a little metal rod known as a catch car would be deployed. That way, if the coaster came rushing back towards the station, the catch car would catch the coaster before it hit the station. If you were wondering if this stop was going to be rough or abrupt, it actually wasn't. It's said to be very smooth. It's just one of those many safety features that, like I said, just sounds really cool. But again, if ever needed, it's one of the safest things imaginable. Of the many times the dragster had a rollback, not once did it ever put anyone in harm's way. There are many more safety features I could bore you with, but I'll save you the trouble for now. The amount of safety and planning that goes into one of these metal machines is quite extensive. In fact, you're actually more likely to die on your drive to an amusement park due to a car crash than you are riding a roller coaster. And knowing the thought of that, knowing that everything is perfectly safe while you're on a roller coaster, is quite nice, knowing that it will only be a bundle of fun. So, now I want to transition a bit into this passage that I've read for you all this morning. It's quite interesting, and I like to give context on passages and a little background information. So a little bit of a background information before we get to this scene in this passage, Jesus has actually started making his ministry known. His miracles are now public. And what that means is basically he's told people, instead of don't go and tell anybody after he's performed a miracle, he's just recently said, okay, you can start going and telling people now, which is kind of a big deal. That, and he recently claimed to actually be the Son of God, which is kind of a big deal, and obviously it brings a lot of popularity to the scene, which makes sense because, again, there's this huge crowd that's actually following Jesus. So at this point, you'd imagine they're walking all day, walking along, and they notice a huge crowd has been following them for quite some time. And the disciples, they're beginning to get a little worried about this crowd. Why? Because there's this little part in this passage that you may have not seen at first, but it's quite important. See, it mentions that it was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. I'm not going to get into a lot of details on what all that is and what all that means, but all you really need to know is the Jewish Passover celebration starts in the evening. Now imagine this large crowd following you all day. Legs are tired, everyone's hungry, and it's time for dinner. You can't exactly send them home because they can't go all the way back before dark because they've been going with you all day. And you can't exactly send them off to the nearest town to go get food because businesses are closing. Think of it as Christmas Eve. Businesses are closing early. But the thing is these disciples, they're sitting here and they're tasked with this idea of coming up with a way of getting food for all these people. And now Jesus is seeing all of this. He's probably sitting down, leaning back, relaxing. And these disciples, they're probably all nervous. They're probably beginning to argue with one another, fight, trying to come up with an idea. And Jesus, he's probably sitting back, I'd imagine, leaning back, and then he leans over to Philip and he asks, dude, how in the world are we going to get food for all these people? He's probably just teasing them, honestly. So here they are. They're tasked with this idea of gathering food for a large crowd, just the 12 of them, and they can't send them away, and there's nowhere to go and get food. What do you think came of that situation? I'm going to give you one guess, and I'll give you about 5 seconds to think about it. But think about it. This large group following Jesus with hungry stomachs, something's bound to go wrong, and there's no way of buying food. What do you think happened? If you guessed that they fed all the people, you'd be right. This passage is actually the build-up to John's account of feeding the 5,000. So yes, all of these people actually left with full stomachs. This small passage I read to you I find to be quite important, not only because it's the build-up to a very big miracle, but it's actually very important because it just seems like any other situation that Jesus and his disciples were actually put in. Just a high-tense, high-stress situation. I mean, I don't know how I, with a group of 12 of my friends, could feed a group of 5,000. I just don't see it being possible. I don't know how I'd manage because it would be quite stressful. See, again, at first glance, this passage I read to you isn't anything too special. Again, it's high tense, high stress. But there's one part in this passage that I want to read for you all one more time. And it's the last two verses. So John 6, 5 through 6, which reads, Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Did you catch it there? There at the end. That last sentence. For he already knew what he was going to do. Again, there Jesus is, sitting back, relaxing, watching his disciples panic and argue about this situation that they think they need to find an answer to. It's one of those that Jesus knew. He knew what was going to happen, and he had already accounted for the problem that was at hand. Just as roller coasters engineers accounted for all the problems that may have occurred on a roller coaster's run. Many years before you had even stepped into that car, months and even years before the ride was actually constructed. Every time you sit down and throw your hands up in excitement, you're trusting in the engineers who created the ride. And again, that brings me back to the text for today, where Jesus is just sitting back with his disciples before they had even arrived at this hill, before they had even set off on that journey that day. He had already accounted for what was going to happen. He already knew that this was going to be a problem. And at the end of the story, as you may have guessed earlier, he fed the 5,000 with ease. All because he knew what was going to happen. All because he knew what he was doing. All they had to do was just trust in him. And clearly they had a little bit of trust in him if at the end of the story, everything worked out. I could keep going for today, but what I want you all to leave and understand and leave with, is simply this. Jesus is in control. Before you even knew him, before you thought of him, before you even wanted to have a relationship with him. Or maybe you're one of those that just is sitting and just watching and observing. Doesn't want a relationship just yet, but is just observing. He still knows, and he's still in control. Whatever's yet to come and whatever you've gone through, anytime something knocks you down, all he asks is that you simply just give him a little bit of your trust. Because he will get you through. Because he's an all-powerful God. There's nothing, and there always will be nothing, that he can't do. Because at the end of the day, he has a bigger plan for each one of you than what you may realize. And through whatever journey he may take you on, whether that's big or small, one thing will always remain true. It's the fact that Jesus will always have accounted for any pothole and stumble that may be along your journey. The one thing he's ever going to ask you to do is just to trust in him. Trust in him through the good and the bad, Because there are many stories that could be told, but we don't know which one's going to be written. But no matter what happens in the end, you'll come to realize that everything was truly under control from the beginning, all because it was accounted for, all because of a little faith that can move mountains. And all of this is possible because of that one simple truth, the simple truth that Jesus is always in control.